Welcome to the Writer Reads The Runaway. This is part 2 of 3. They were grey, with a curious touch of jungle green. I felt as though I could fall a long way into their depths. With an effort, I pulled myself back, forcing myself to look away from him. He smiled, turning to his daughter. "See," he said to her, "already he can resist a compulsion he wasn't aware of being placed. You will find he's all we could have hoped he would be." "I hope so, father," she replaced, and again her voice contained a husky softness. "You won't find another to replace Garrick in a hurry." I was puzzled by what it could mean. I turned to look to his face once more. "You can go, Adrian," he said, dismissing the girl. "You have done us well." He paused. "And do not worry about Garrick. He is too valuable for me to give up." She bowed her head at that, and I caught a fleeting glimpse of a pleased smile as she turned away. She did not look back at me, but wended her way through the garden to disappear beneath another arch. I could not help but watch until she had gone. As she reached the arch, her form shimmered and she grew. Her hair became as blonde as her father's. The protruding ears vanished. She was a woman once more, although I did not know what she had been before. When my gaze returned to the man, I found he was studying me. His eyes narrowed in thought. I bowed, not knowing what else to do. The frown disappeared and he smiled. "You have come a long way," he said. "Not by choice," I replied. "What will you do now you have escaped?" "I don't know," I answered. "In truth, I was preparing to be recaptured when your daughter found me." He had no reply for this, but his eyes grew thoughtful, and he nodded once more. He placed a foot on the edge of the wall surrounding the pool at the fountain's foot. "And what would you say if I claimed you were here by my design?" he demanded. "I'd not believe you," I said. "You had no way of knowing who would be caught in the army's plan." He laughed and shook his head. "I ordered those plans carried out. It was my pen that scratched the signature authorizing those raids." I stared at him, trembling in disbelief. It could not be. I stared a moment longer, then looked around. This time I noted the quality of the marble making up the walls of his garden. I looked back the way I had come. Someone had closed the gate to the street. And the street was not what I had thought it was. I turned to face him. "My daughter is not what she seems," he told me, and it was my turn to nod. I did not know what else to do. My legs were shaking, and I felt the need to sit down and feel the sureness of stone against my skin. "Why did you seek me?" I asked. There was nothing else to say. The palace grounds beyond the fancy wrought iron of the gate that I had thought led to a street were all the proof I needed. I obeyed the demands of my legs and sat at the edge of the pool. He was quiet, this king of another nation, and his quiet disturbed me. I spoke once more. "What do you want?" I asked, lifting my gaze from where it had fallen to the depths of the pool. His gaze met mine, but still he did not reply. "If you only wanted me, then why?" He was angry then, and thunder rolled in the jungle depths of his eyes. "Enough questions," he snapped. "Be content that it was you I sought." I felt my own anger rise as I remembered burning villages and dispossessed people, as I recalled the indiscriminate selection of men and women to be torn from their homelands and loved ones and shipped away. I felt the warring tensions rise through my limbs and decided to kill him with my bare hands. He must have read my intentions from my face, because he signalled briefly with one finger. There was a soft and sudden movement from the direction of the gate. Then strong hands gripped my arms and a soft voice sounded in my ear. "Don't." I remembered the voice of the soldier's captain crying out the same word to warn a soldier who pursued me. It was the same as the voice in my ear. Gradually I forced the tension from my arms and made my legs relax. The king, for king of my enemy he was, spoke again. "What we did was done from charity." I snorted my disbelief, forced to listen, but not believing what I heard. The king ignored me. "Look into the pool," he ordered. It was a simple enough request. Reluctantly I obeyed, and saw the high moors ablaze with fire. Oil bush burnt without respite, shrivelling the delicate blooms of summer in the flames. There would be no herbs for healing. no forage for our cattle, and no feed for the steppe deer we hunted in autumn. The flames raced over a hill and bore down on a settlement. I looked closer. I knew this settlement well, for it was my own. I could feel myself trembling again. The few who had been left would be hard pressed to protect it from the fire. I glanced up at the king, prepared to call him beast and monster and maybe bastard, as a reflection of his parentage. He merely pointed at the flame-shimmering pool. "Watch," he commanded, and there was no softness in his tone. Obediently, I bent my head to watch the scene within the pool. This time I saw riders advancing through the flames, their beasts jogging forward unscathed. They paused at the top of the rise above the settlement, and then charged. As they swept closer, I could see their visage and cried out in alarm. Not knowing that I had done so, I rose to stand, bending over the pond, my knuckles white where I gripped the wall's edge. The guard captain released me. Beasts, demons, monsters from whatever place men name in their curses. These were the horrors I saw. They rode upon creatures whose very savagery was stamped upon their features, and they rode against my home. I held my breath as they reached the settlement's edge. Surely now the warriors that had been left would stand forth and protect those within. But no, and I turned to snarl my anger at the king. A series of shouts and angry cries returned my attention to the pool. "Gone! Gone also! Robbed we have been of our prey!" It was the leader of the riders and their beasts. His eyes glowed like the leaping flames as he turned in his saddle to scream his loss to more than just his men. As his gaze swept past us, the king at the fountain side snapped his fingers, and the picture faded. I looked to him once more, my anger also fading as the pool became clear water once again. "Why?" I asked, no longer afraid of his wrath. "Why didn't you just tell us?" There was sadness in his face. The grooves that gave it character grew deeper than before. "I did," he replied, "and your king promised to take precautions. It wasn't until late spring that we heard of the laughter at his court. By then we did not have the time to be subtle." I stood before him, still leaning on the edge of the fountain. At last I asked the question he was waiting for. "Why did you take us away?" I asked. "You had what you wanted. We were forced to take shelter in the lowland citadels." "We have weapons," the king replied, "but not the warriors to use them." I would have argued, remembering the arms his soldiers had carried when they tore me from the Moors. My gaze wandered to the captain and the soldiers who accompanied him. My doubt showed on my face. The king smiled, but his smile was tired. "Not the sort of weapons any man can use. Weapons I speak of require a very special sort of wielder. I am hoping that even a few of those I took will be able." He sighed, waiting for the last question he knew I had to ask, so I obliged. "Why am I so important then?" I asked. "Why pursue me when the others chose to remain?" "Why indeed?" the king replied. "Because of Adrienne, because of the seers and their seeing, because I felt a sureness in my bones when I first saw you, and because of this." He stepped away from the fountain's edge and walked through an archway to a door decorated with unicorns, pegasi, and other beasts of legend. The door opened onto a brightly painted hall. Here the king's footsteps slowed, and he allowed me time to look at the pictures and understand their content. Those closest to the door showed huntsmen tracking deer and goats, or taking them mid-stride with a well-aimed spear. Knights rode from gates, falcons on their shoulders and ladies by their sides, and wizards entertained children at a market with coloured lights and conjured creatures. As the hall progressed, those pictures grew darker. The hunters led knights after greater prey, ladies waited in fortified castles, and armed guards patrolled the markets. Wizards gazed with worried frowns into mirrors or balls of crystal, and, in the castle's courtyards, smiths worked, creating weapons for waiting soldiers. There were no children to be seen. The king passed beneath another arch, and I did not have time to study all the frescoes at the far end of the hall. I hurried after him and stopped. I was in a cavern, but I didn't know how I came to be there. Before me stood the king, and before him statues were arrayed. There was a woman of amber. In her I saw all the forms of life I could imagine. Her hands were held forward, as though inviting a small child to her arms for comfort, and I longed to take that offer for my own. Standing beside her, there was a stern-looking warrior in knight's armour. He wore a king's crown and held a sceptre that I suspected was a wizard's staff. At his side hung a mighty blade encased in a scabbard of dragon's hide. Other statues stood with these, representing many facets of every race imagined. I stood in awe as yet another drew my attention by speaking the king's name. "Marwan, be welcome," it said in a voice that was as smooth as honey and as slow-moving as a lava sea. Still in awe, I looked toward it and nearly fainted with fright. Dragon it was not, but the dragons were in its keeping. Neither was it a serpent of the sea, although they too were under its command. It was not Fey, nor was it a ruler of the wind. It was not even part of the pantheon openly worshipped in my land. Perhaps in secret. I remembered my mother and her excursions into the mountains, and looked at the statue again.